everybody, welcome to Pro Wrestling Musings, Post Blood and Guts. I am Griff from GA. Joining me today are newcomer Gareth from Pro Wrestling Musings, and of course, you heard me refer to it last week, the purveyor, the prognosticator of pro wrestling, the pro wrestling Pythagoras, if you will, Craig, the creator of Pro Wrestling Musings. Now, you know the topic today, AEW Blood and Guts. It's a match a year in the making, and we finally got it after it seemed like we might never see a match like this. And this obviously has divided opinions like so many things do, but hopefully we can shed a little bit of light onto the statistical point of view. And Craig has worked so hard to put these statistics together, so we will go through them with you here. Guys, I just want to open the floor. First off, we'll start with Gareth making his podcast debut. Overall, before we get into some of the specifics of this match, what did you think about AEW Blood and Guts?
It was one of those, like you said, it was very divisive online, and it was very divisive within myself as well, because there were parts that I loved, and then there were parts which I was not so keen on. So it's one of those things. I always try to look at things objectively. That's just how my brain works, and try to think about things like that. It's one where I've really struggled to do that, because there's so many different elements to this, of like, not only you got 10 people in a match, for example, some of them I really enjoyed, and some of them don't quite feel like they quite fit the match, but or at least within what this is trying to do, at least for me anyway. And so it was really, really weird. Overall, I'd say, like, I enjoyed it, but then there were always, as we're going to get into, there's so many different nuances. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think I'm glad that you brought up, thinking objectively, because I try to do the same thing. And I really, what this match taught me was that there's a lot of, I do my best to be objective, but when it comes to AEW, and this is just me speaking personally, they have bought so much goodwill from me as a fan that the parts of this match that I didn't like, which we will get to, I'm very willing to overlook. When I look back at the match, I remember the things that I love about it, and the things that I didn't like so much, I'm kind of like, well, yeah, it's, whatever. And, I think that's just a comment on the way that I watch AEW. Overall, for me, I think it's a plus. Craig, obviously we'll get into these stats that you so painstakingly put together, but just from a general perspective, before we start to talk numbers, what did you think about AEW's offering here?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I've watched this match twice. Contrary to what people might assume, seeing the stuff that I put together, I usually only watch wrestling matches once. I watched it first time on Thursday evening. Being British, Thursday is about as quickly as you can do it, unless you're mad like Gareth and you stay up all night to watch it. I loved, so the first time I watched this, I loved the beginning of it. And then, I don't know, it felt kind of loose in the middle, and I don't know, I was kind of struggling a bit towards the end, and I was just, by the end of it, I was a bit peeved because of that kind of, that struggle that we have when you're kind of into things and you listen to the preview podcasts and you're like hyped up and expecting the best wrestling match of all time. And that can only happen once. Otherwise, it's not, I hope it's not the best of all time. So, but also I was in a really bad mood on Thursday night. The people seem to make you go to work in order to earn money. They don't just give it to you. It's really frustrating. So I had a bad day at work. Thought this would cheer me up. It did a bit, and then got a bit grumpy. So I watched it again on Friday and actually took the stats. So I watched it on Thursday just watching it, which is a treat because I usually write everything down as I'm watching these. But when I went back over it and I watched it on Friday and I was noting things down, I enjoyed it a lot more. And the story of the match kind of shone through a lot more. My kind of reservations around how the Pinnacle have been presented, and kind of if this was supposed to be the Pinnacle's jumping off point, it seems more about the Inner Circle. I've got a lot of kind of narrative issues, and I think that's what ruined it for me on Thursday. But in terms of just like taking the match as a single thing, like when I do the numbers, it's very enjoyable. It's very well put together. Sammy Guevara looked like an absolute star. So great stuff.
And so we can talk about the kind of generalized narrative after we kind of dive into the numbers here. The way I want to kind of frame this, and I'll give my personal opinion of it, but it's something that I feel like I can generalize a lot of the discussion that I've been seeing about it and kind of boil this match down. So the thing about Blood and Guts or War Games, whatever you want to call it, it's not a match that is going to be a 5-star classic. I do feel like you need either a straight singles or a straight tag match if you are going to have an absolute classic. I think when you add in all these stipulations, you add in multiple handicap portions, 10 guys, I think it's hard for you to reach that level, when you start talking about this is, one of the best wrestling matches that I've seen. I think it's about storytelling. I think this Blood and Guts match is about trying to tell a story between the Inner Circle and the Pinnacle, and I do think in that regard it worked. What I kind of blame AEW for not doing was for anyone who saw the road to AEW or the road to Blood and Guts on YouTube. I thought that was absolutely phenomenal, and I really thought it framed the match beautifully, because I thought the whole point of that kind of 10 to 15 minute preview of Blood and Guts was basically to tell you, if you read between the lines, this is a storytelling match. We're trying to tell you a story about how brutal this match is and about how much these groups hate each other. That's what we're trying to do. And I feel like they really did that. The problem is that on Dynamite, they were building it up like this is going to be the best wrestling match you've ever seen. And, like you said, Craig, it didn't quite get there. So it's all about how do you frame this? You want to set the expectations low and then over deliver, right? That's and a lot of times that's AEW's philosophy. So I think for this one, they set the expectations in the right place if you were looking for a storytelling match. But if you were looking for the best wrestling match you ever saw, that's not what you got here. But I don't think that's what Blood and Guts is kind of designed to do. So let's get into the numbers a little bit, and we'll start where all good things start, and that's at the beginning. Sammy Guevara starts things off against Dax Harwood. Craig, you said Sammy is a star. This 5-minute portion of the match, or I guess 4.5 minutes, I thought this was great. I thought Sammy looked great. And Dax, I think, did exactly what he was supposed to do, which is he stepped in there, and when it was a straight one-on-one contest, the Inner Circle, and in this case Sammy Guevara, they were better on this occasion. So Sammy really dominates with 73% of the offense in this stretch. Craig, when you look at this first 5 minutes, it's obviously so important to setting the tone for this match. I thought it did a really good job. What did you think about what we saw here?
So first of all, apologies if any crying came through on my microphone. I muted it too late. It wasn't me. I have a newborn, a 2-month-old newborn. My partner's just taking her out for a walk, and I think she was a little bit unhappy about being strapped in and stuff. So I don't know if that came through. But yeah, I was too slow to be like, oh, I should mute this. First of all, Sammy Guevara's great. He hadn't wrestled in it was 2-3 months or something. I think they were saying afterwards on the internet. That's quite interesting in itself. What I've done for this, start at the beginning. So a lot of this is based on the statistics that I put together. Hopefully you've seen those by now. This isn't
if you haven't, why are you here?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Go to the website if you want to be able to refer to it as you're doing it. Click on there'll be a Blood and Guts article. It's not there right now, but it will be in the next couple of hours. So it might be easier to just glance at it if sometimes seeing things is easier to follow as well as just hearing it. What I've done for this I've never done before is I've created a big offense category. Something that has been a big theme is that strikes don't seem to matter too much in terms of how wrestlers or wrestling companies structure their matches. So like when I say strikes, I mean just like strikes that are like the foundation of the match. So what I've done is I've created a big offense category, which is to include strikes that result in strike down. So strike downs, grapples, dives, and submissions are going into that big offense total. Just kind of highlights wrestlers that go beyond simple strikes to kind of punish their opponents more powerfully, impactfully. So Sammy Guevara has 11 big offensive hits compared to Dax Harwood's 2. Sammy Guevara's big offense comes from 8 strike downs, 1 grapple, and 2 dives. He also outdid Harwood 39 strikes to 15. Harwood only managed 1 strike down and 1 grapple. So this was all Guevara, 73% of the offense to Guevara in that chunk.
I feel like this was kind of the storytelling part of the match is, you know, if you read between the lines on this, the Inner Circle, when the odds were even, were better. I mean, they, at every point, you know, Sammy was better than Harwood when it was just singles, and then when Ortiz got in, Sammy and Ortiz were better than Dax and Spears, and you know, and it keeps going all the way up until the all-out assault portion. I thought that was kind of the story that they were trying to tell here, and that I think is a reason why people will criticize the match. We'll get to the all-out assault portion later. But I do want to talk about just this portion when Sammy was in. Obviously, he spent about 6 or 7 minutes as the sole Inner Circle competitor, and even when he was working 2-on-1 against Dax and Spears, he still had the majority of the match offense. He had 55% of the match offense. But of course, you know, as you said, Craig, when you get to the big offense, he didn't have a lot of that, and I thought that was a really good touch that Dax and Spears, they got a little bit more punishment in on Sammy, but just by the pure volume of Sammy's strikes and what he was able to do, he ends up with the small majority of the offense. So Gareth, when you look at this, when you look at just the opening portion with Sammy in for the Inner Circle, I thought, and apparently Craig did as well, that this was a real star-making performance for him. And I thought, again, that it set the tone for the rest of the match that we were about to see. So when you look at this, do you feel like watching this opening portion, you were kind of you were immersed in the story that they were going to try to tell for the duration of this match?
Yeah, I think you summed up a lot of it really well there with in terms of the Inner Circle. Every time they kind of had a level playing field, they were always better. And a lot of that was like the tone for that was set with Guevara early on. Guevara versus Dax Harwood is one of my favorite like wrestlers in AEW, just because like he does everything just so well. It's that old school style, but he really, really hones in on it. So him versus pretty much anyone is like a dream match for me. But him versus Guevara in particular was one that I thought maybe they could have done in the build up to this, but then obviously now in the knowledge that this was the opening pairing, which I think it definitely should have been. I can see why they didn't do that. But even so, like the only like negative thing I had from this is that I wanted them to those two to just go for like longer, because I was enjoying that portion of the match so much. A kind of like a trend which I've seen a lot of people kind of reiterating online is that this match started out super hot, really, really good, and then the more you get in and the longer it goes, the more it kind of just stops being as good. I don't know if that's naturally just because people like, I don't know, a bit more intensity, and obviously the more someone's got in a gas tank, the longer they're going to be going. I don't know if it's that or whether the match legitimately did just get a little bit worse as it went along. That was certainly my feeling. But Guevara in this early portion, even when other people were coming in, like you were saying, when Spears came in as well, he kept going, and he was just like, it really was a star-making performance that I think we really needed, especially considering like he was the one in particular that we hadn't seen wrestle in ages. And yeah, so I really loved the opening. And again, the only thing I wanted was Dax to get a bit more in, and then Guevara to make a comeback. But you know, the nature of this match is it can't just go on forever 1v1. So maybe that's something we'll get in the future.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at the statistics that Craig put together. The portions where the numbers are even, they don't look like normal wrestling matches that we would expect, because you can't have a normal wrestling match in 2 minutes. And I think that that's a trap that both WCW fell in when they were doing War Games, and now I think NXT falls into it, where in 2-minute chunks they try to have like a mini match, and you can't do it. You have to tell a very specific story in the 2 minutes that you get. And I do feel like these guys did it. I mean, it's obviously it's easy when you have the handicap, because the story is always the same. And even in this match, it wasn't. Sammy got most of the offense when it was Harwood and Spears. But then, of course, when you add in FTR, I thought a great portion of this was FTR comes in, and that is the first time when the Pinnacle has the majority of the match offense, and it's 100% because FTR start working together, and the whole story is FTR is one of the best tag teams on earth. So this is just what they do. So I thought that AEW they approached this match with the understanding that they were not going to do a bunch of these mini matches and try to tell mini stories. They had one overarching narrative. One thing that doesn't obviously get picked up by the stats, but just one thing that I want to mention, because it was the highlight of the match for me when Ortiz got in and Sammy and Sean Spears get up onto the ropes of the two rings, and they're locked up on top of the ropes, and Ortiz throws a chair into the back of Spears' leg, so Spears steps over onto Sammy's side, and Sammy does the Spanish fly off the ropes. That was the moment of the match for me. That was as loud as I've heard a crowd since the pandemic, and I'm including WrestleMania, where they had 5 times the number of people, however many people they had there. The crowd was just absolutely molten for that, and I loved that, because it's not something that we've heard in a year plus since the pandemic started. So I thought that was phenomenal. Craig, the match seemed to really turn. We kind of hit the second lap, if you will, when FTR got in as a team, and they got 100% of the match offense in their 2-minute portion when they were in, and it seemed like this was going to be the story now going forward. Is the Pinnacle, when they had an advantage, were better. When the Inner Circle was even strength, they were better. So, as someone who looked at this match and analyzed it in the detail that you did, do you feel like that overarching story worked for this particular match?
Yeah, I would have had that sooner, actually. I would have kept Spears for a bit, but I think they wanted to do the big chair shot. So I'll just fill in the gaps to get us up to there. So Spears comes in for the second bit, and there's not, as you mentioned, Sammy Guevara still has 55% of the offense, mainly because he got in 12 strikes, only one of which was a strike down. During that period, Sean Spears and Dax Harwood hit one grapple and one strike down, that strike down being the chair shot over the head. So 2 big offensive moves in that 1.5 minutes. Perhaps that's a bit of a waste of the advantage, although he did, crack him over the head, which, helps. So that's interesting. But then when we look at what happens next, as you said, Ortiz comes in next, and it evens things up. 63% now to Guevara in offense and total offense. 11 big offensive moves compared to 0 of Dax and Spears in that third portion of the match. And they hit 6 strike downs, 2 grapples, which would be 8. And then there were 3 weapon hits as well when guys were on the ground, so they didn't count as strike downs. I've also included weapon shots as big offense, obviously. So yeah, they're making more of it. So it's not, Spears didn't take advantage of the handicap. Cash Wheeler came in he was out of a cannon, jumping over the ropes, a little messily, but it did the job. Whilst FTR were in, they got 100% of the match offense. The Inner Circle team didn't get a lick in, and they hit 15, what I was classifying as bigger moves. 3 of those were strike downs, 2 grapples, even a dive. 35 seconds of submission time, 4 weapon shots too. So much better from the Pinnacle side there. And yeah, I enjoyed that portion of the match when Cash came in. It was fast. It was more. There were more kind of stuff happening. Yeah, quite simple. Just wanted to see more stuff.
I really like the graph. You put together multiple graphs on this, but the specifically the total offense graph. I really love this look because it really shows you that the story of the match really took form when Cash Wheeler got in. And it basically established, okay, this is what we're doing. This is how the rest of this match is going to go. And I think it puts into visual form the overarching story, not only of this match, but of Pinnacle versus Inner Circle, which is that the Inner Circle, man versus man, in this match, and maybe overall, is better than the Pinnacle. But the Pinnacle, even though they're the newer group, they seem to work together as a team. Like, they have FTR, who is maybe the best tag team in the world. And when Wardlow gets in, for example, Wardlow comes in and Pinnacle has 90% of the match offense there. Big offense is 9-1 in the 2-minute portion that Wardlow's in. So suddenly Wardlow starts working with these guys really, really well. And I thought that was kind of the story. And I do wonder if it's going to be that going forward, where the Inner Circle is going to get the advantage in the matches between, the individual or tag team matches that are going to happen. If Inner Circle is going to get advantages in those, and then the Pinnacle, is going to pull out some of their dirty tricks or, whatever it is that they do. I
have a clever analogy that I've just thought up.
Okay.
So see how you're talking about that match, the match offense. So it's kind of like tennis. In tennis, the serve, my words, I've lost my words. The serve alternates. So it's a big deal if you break your opponent's serve.
Right.
So essentially what's happened here is Sammy Guevara has broken the Pinnacle serve early on. When they had the advantage, when it was 2-on-1, Sammy Guevara was able to keep the offense up. So he got more than 50%. That's the only break in that pattern in the graph. So then for the rest of the match, the Pinnacle started hitting aces.
It's a very apt analogy, I think. Let me continue with that. So if we're talking tennis, then Wardlow in this match, I thought, was the equivalent of Rafael Nadal on clay. This guy was unbeatable. I mean, there's just nothing you could do about him. And the only thing that the Inner Circle was able to do to get him out of the match was basically to team up on him. I mean, there was a spot where the Inner Circle, I think, had 4 guys running at Wardlow, and he was able to defend from all of them until I think someone hit him with a chair or something. That I thought was a phenomenal story that they were telling. I really like Wardlow. I like what he's done in the build to this match, and I think he does his job as an individual. He comes in and immediately becomes the most dangerous man in the match. And he contrasts so well, I feel like, as a character to Jake Hager, because Wardlow, he has that intensity, but he so often kind of has that, really, he's got a single expression on his face. So every so often you'll see that intensity boil up. But usually he just kind of looks the same, like he's just woken up to eat breakfast, which I assume is like several bricks doused in lighter fluid. I don't know what he does, but I think it contrasts really well to Jake Hager, who we've seen really break out into this, super intense guy. And Hager comes in, and it looks like when Hager got into this match, I thought it looked like a hot tag. Because if you look at our statistics from tag team matches, they look very similar to this in the portion where the hot tag happens, where suddenly the babyface team gets 60 to 70% of the match offense, a bunch of strikes, almost 50% strike down percentage. I mean, that's what Hager was in here to do, and but none of those were really against Wardlow. And ultimately, when Hager and Wardlow did lock up, that was another one of my favorite portions of this match, and I hope that we get a true singles match between them with some real heat, because they kind of teased it when they were both part of the Inner Circle. So I thought that overall, Wardlow is being built as, a monster, like I feel like he should be, and Hager feels like a pretty good foil to him.
Yeah, I think Wardlow reminds me so much of Batista in Evolution. Like he feels like he's going to be this huge star, but for now he's just sitting there biding his time. And in this match, when he first entered, he kind of stood. He didn't do anything immediately. He kind of just stood. And I think it wasn't quite executed the way to maximum potential, maybe. I think what they were going for, they didn't quite achieve with it. But what I think they wanted was, like, Wardlow could come in and do all the moves that Hager did, because he, like, you see when he comes in, like, it's just like all sorts. He's going everywhere. He's jumping on everything. Wardlow kind of just came in and just changed the match on his presence alone, really. And I found that really impressive. When I was watching it, I just wanted a bit more. I just wanted, I don't know, maybe for like a bit of time, he just did that thing where he just brought his presence into it, and then he just went wild. But I don't know, maybe if it was slightly longer than 2 minutes, they could have, like, 2-minute segments between each one, they could have done something like that. But like, to really capture that, like, presence that Wardlow had, you did have to give him quite a lot of time to do that. But yeah, like, there was a moment, I can't remember where in the match it was, but it was when, like, Inner Circle were all just, like, chiming in on Wardlow and basically having to cut him down. And then later on, they showed, like, Hager using, like, proper, like, MMA grappling on Wardlow, and, like, he's had to basically, it's something that the commentary didn't pick up on. I don't think most people, like, kind of noticed, I guess. But, like, it was quite a nuanced little thing, and, a lot of people just look at Jake Hager as, well, big dummy, blah, 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 But it was actually quite impressive, because I was like, he's had to use the one thing he has over Wardlow in that MMA experience and that wrestling background, because the sheer power of Wardlow, as we saw when they did have that match a few months ago when they were both in the Inner Circle, he can't handle him any other way. So it was after Wardlow got chopped down and Hager basically took him out of the match. But Wardlow had his moment, and just reaffirmed that thing of, like, they're keeping him kind of calm for now, but when it's time to explode like they did with Batista, I think that's what's going to happen. I'm really excited for it because I love him.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad that you brought that up, because it does feel like, in terms of the way Batista was booked with Evolution, that's what they're kind of going for with Wardlow. But then they've teased it in reverse, right? So when Wardlow, before MJF got involved with all this, and it was just MJF and Wardlow, several times they teased this idea of Wardlow, turning on MJF, and it being that big Batista turning on Triple H moment. That obviously ended up with a great WrestleMania match, and now they've gotten away from that because now both of them are involved with the Pinnacle and they both seem to be happy. But we know that exists within Wardlow, that at some point MJF is going to push him too far. And you look at the size of Wardlow and what he does in every match that he's in. This is not a guy that you want to push, and it seems inevitable that MJF is going to do it at some point.
Yeah, imagine that pop. Hopefully, if their crowd's back, that's going to be huge, because he's already very popular.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I will pop for it. I am ready. I am ready for that moment. It doesn't need to happen soon, but whenever it does, I am ready for the moment when Wardlow turns on MJF and we can really see what he can make of himself as an individual. Because I feel like his promos are excellent. His promo during the Pinnacle sit down, I thought was a real. It was an unexpected surprise that he's so well spoken, and his voice is just naturally intimidating. It really matches his body, which is, again, something that Batista also has, where, as soon as he opens his mouth, you're like, okay, wow, this guy actually has the voice to match the physique that I'm seeing, and not all guys have that, so Wardlow does have that advantage.
One thing on that as well is AEW are really good at knowing when to let people talk. Sometimes in certain other companies, they'll just throw you out there, maybe to see if you'll think he'll swim, or maybe whatever it is. AEW tend to kind of hold what you have, and maybe they're building on those promo skills in the background, but it feels like when Wardlow has spoken, it's been when he's needed to speak, and that really comes across really powerfully. It's like he's not just out there yapping about everything, which MJF does, and he's great at that.
Right.
But Wardlow, he really sticks to that, and it just builds this aura around him. And when that does explode, like you said, he's going to have those promo skills even probably better, because I'm sure they'll be working on them. That's one thing AEW does really well. And yeah, it's just, I can't wait for it. But again, I will wait, because when it comes, it's going to be so worth it.
Yeah, exactly. He works really well with what he's doing right now. I'm really glad that you brought up Jake Hager getting into the match and bringing in more of that kind of MMA background to be able to stop Wardlow, because I think you're right. The commentary didn't really pick up on that, and I do think that's a big part of Hager's character. I think if you just looked at him as a wrestler, he's a guy. He's above average, right? He's a really, really solid wrestler. But there's nothing that sets him apart. The way that we saw Sammy Guevara, there are things that Sammy did in this match that I feel like no one else in AEW, or maybe Ray Phoenix, but that's about it, could actually do. And so, he's set apart by his wrestling ability. Jake Hager, what sets him apart is he has a legitimate shoot background. And if you are a subscriber over on YouTube, we did a video a few weeks ago talking about Ty Conti and AEW in general, the way that they treat shoot fighters that are in their company, because they now have several, including my boy Anthony Agogo. That is reference number one to Anthony. But they do have several.
On the video, Mitch, like, not enough people have watched that video. Is that the problem?
No, there's no problem actually. More than enough people have watched that video actually. So I appreciate all of you that have. The only reason I bring it up is because this is what AEW likes to do with shoot fighters. It influences the way that they fight in matches, but they don't. Almost sometimes to their detriment, like in this situation, they don't actually bring it up. They don't bring up that Jake Hager has this background in Bellator with mixed martial arts. And I'm with you, Gareth. I wish they did, because that would really be a story. That is the difference between Hager and Wardlow. And you saw it when Hager got in. The match offense, the difference in the percentage is not as profound as it was for other even portions of this match, because Wardlow is so difficult to be able to take down. But the big offense total, when you look at 10-0, that's the big offense, which is, remember, when you just remove normal strikes, that's because Wardlow was trying to fire these strikes off against Hager, and so was everyone else. But Wardlow was the closest to being effective. So he was just trying to fight back against this, but Hager ultimately was too much for him. And I believe it was this portion when Hager got Sean Spears, I think, to tap out with an ankle lock. I think it was during this portion. So it was, yeah. Okay, thanks for clarifying. So yeah, that was, you really put Jake Hager over with that, because I mean, ultimately, he got the tap, which is what you needed to win this match. But of course, you can't win until the all-out assault portion. So I liked when Hager got in. I think Hager's got a ton of fire. His Hager bomb I really like, because it's. A Vader bomb looks dangerous when it's a 400-pounder landing on your chest. When it's like a 285-pound, kind of trimmed down guy like Hager, it doesn't look as impactful unless you take a giant running start like he does. So I like this portion. Craig, I don't know how you felt about this particular one, but I personally love the Hager-Wardlow matchup, and I think this one was another really strong storytelling portion of this match.
Yeah. Hager was great when he came in. It's another testament to how AEW make the most of everything. So the Jake Hager Wardlow story is that they stare at each other. That's the story. That was the story in the Inner Circle. And that's the story. It was, and then there was that great promo where Jake Hager just kind of snapped and started kind of gabbling at Wardlow. And then Wardlow gave it back, and the match you talked about was fine, but we're probably going to get something with, as you say, more heat at some point. I really agree on the different finishes thing. Like, there are a lot of plot holes in wrestling that we just kind of accept. The Irish Whip. nobody wants to get rid of the Irish Whip because the running moves are great. So the Irish Whip is going nowhere, and none of us want it to. Cool. But there are other things like a baby face in a handicap match somehow overcoming the odds. I always remember being like 13 or something watching The Undertaker take on the, at that time, WWE champion Brock Lesnar and The Big Show in a handicap match and winning via getting them counted out. And that was just like, but like the story of the match was he was going to win, and they were even like cheating a bit. And it's just like, why? Like that's just, it's such a big logic hole. It just pokes too many holes in the product. And AEW are staying away from that. And the other logic hole is why are all you guys pinning wrestlers when we all know that the match doesn't really end until somebody hits a finisher most of the time, unless it's Raw and there's a distraction roll-up, of course. Fiend, WrestleMania, Randy Orton, Seth Rollins, Hell in a Cell, you know. Yeah. So in politics, I'm going to go on a tangent. In politics, there's this idea of the Overton window, and what happens is the Overton window is like inside that window is the stuff that you can say and get elected. If you go too extreme, then you're never going to get elected. But what you can do is you drag the Overton window to the side by saying a little bit more and a little bit more each time. When Margaret Thatcher was in power and she was like reducing taxes on rich people, the top tax rate was like 60%. So she reduced the amount of tax that people that were earning over like, I don't know, like £500,000 a year, she reduced it from like 60% to 55%. I think it's down to 40% now. And that's like an example of how the Overton window is like, the Conservatives have been nudging it, you know, to the right for years. And I think AEW are doing that with, see, this is where it's going back to. I think AEW are doing that with finishes. So like you're seeing more, so Cody has his two finishers now with the submission move. That's not unusual. Darby Allin, does Darby Allin have a submission hold? Maybe not.
He doesn't have a submission that he uses consistently. He does have that mousetrap roll up that he's used on several occasions.
The Last Supper, I believe, is his one. Yeah. So they're kind of expanding the way that matches finish a bit. So, you know, it's not like Randy Orton where it's RKO or nothing. There's kind of like three kinds of finishers that you can have in AEW, with the kind of the introduction of like the pin finisher, which I would kind of credit Okada for that, with that kind of sit down thing that he used against Omega in the famous 7-star match. So I think they're nudging that kind of window of what you can do in a wrestling match to be like more creative. And I do hope that we will see perhaps different finishes, because Jake Hager could be great if he wrestled differently. He's kind of an MMA guy that does tiny bits of MMA, but mostly wrestling. Like he's still more Jack Swagger than he is MMA fighter. But that's a really good point. It's the bit where he kind of had the arm pinned. I think Excalibur tried. Excalibur at one point said that Wardlow passed the guard or something, and then Swagger had him down and it was never mentioned again. I think I agree, could have made more out of it. But yeah, I would like that there was a finish. I'm not going to state the guy's name because he's got allegations against him, but there's an NXT finish a few years ago where Cassius Ohno was, I think it was at a knee. He was hit with a knee and then pinned straight away. So it does happen. I'm going to stop talking because I've gone on a bit of a self-indulgent tirade there. So yes, I agree.
Just to back up that point a little bit, Hangman Page has recently used a submission, the Deadeye, and obviously his Buckshot Lariat. There might be another one. Just in recent months, he's had at least 3 different ways in which he's finished matches. So, like you say, AEW is certainly doing that more, and I like it.
Yeah, I think there has been a lot of... Well, this is a general point about AEW. I feel like what AEW wanted to do was they wanted to give a wrestling product that obviously the creators of it that they enjoyed, and then kind of match that up with what people want to see. AEW came into a situation where, WWE was king and Impact had kind of, fallen behind. New Japan was just starting to make its way into the US. And then you had like Ring of Honor and MLW that had, passionate following, but fairly small in comparison to the whole of wrestling fans. And so AEW has come in and they've kind of said, all of these things that people want from their wrestling, let's try to give that to them. Let's try to, as Craig, I think, very astutely points out, let's try to not give them everything at once, but mix in some of these things that people want. And one of the things that I see people saying a lot that they want from their wrestling is different finishes. They say we don't necessarily always want, the RKO, to take that example, or the pedigree. That's going to be the finish for every single match you ever see. We don't necessarily want that. We want to have a little bit more variety, and AEW has now gradually moved into the area where that's what they're going to start doing. And I do think that they started teasing that early because who was their first world champion? The first world champion was Chris Jericho. And Jericho has like 1,000 different moves that he's used at any given time. I mean, he's wrestled forever, so it makes sense. But he has all these different moves, and then he adds in the Judas effect on top of all of that, which is now his mega finisher that no one's kicked out of. And so I think AEW's moved to the point where, they're saying we want our wrestlers to be able to have multiple different ways to win matches. And there is something to be said for something like the Stunner, where it's like, yeah, it's the finish to every single match, but it's a great move and people pop for it. If you got a move that's hot, if it's over, then do it. But there is going to be a point where it's not as over, and then you got to have other ways to keep people engaged in a match. And I think AEW's kind of gone to that philosophy a little bit. As we move towards the all-out assault portion, this is the part that I think really divided a lot of opinion, and myself included. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this particular portion of the match. So once we get evened up, the Inner Circle dominates. 73% of the match offense belongs to the Inner Circle, which is the highest total for them at any point outside of Sammy Guevara starting the match. So that is a pretty big deal for a portion that took almost 12 minutes. That was, the actual match-winning portion of this thing. The Inner Circle just absolutely dominates. How do you guys feel about the baby faces dominating in this fashion for this long in this kind of match? We'll start with Gareth.
Yeah, this is where the match started to turn a bit. And it sounds harsh when you say, oh, as soon as Jericho entered, the match went downhill. I don't think it was necessarily that. I think it was how they planned this match beyond portion. Mm-hmm. And like you said, the babyface is kind of like dominating. I think what I would have hoped for, or what would have done better for me, again, as I said earlier, I've tried to look at this objectively, and it's kind of hard because there are so many subjective factors, and it's just too wild, really, to break everything down and go, this was good, this was bad. I mean, you could do that, but we'd be here all day, But, like, I just felt like I wanted a bit more. I was already struggling. I love Santana and Ortiz, and Sammy Guevara I quite like. I'm not his biggest fan, but I quite like him. Hager and Jericho are guys I've never been huge fans of. I did really enjoy Jericho's run with the title, but as soon as he dropped that, everything he's done since then, or not everything, but most of it, I've just kind of been meh. And I kind of just want him off my screen at this point because there's so many other people. I get why he's there, don't get me wrong. But like so many other people I'm personally more invested in. Mm. But so I was looking for something in this match to make me get behind the Inner Circle as a group because I'm just more into the Pinnacle, really. Like, again, Wardlow seems like that Batista figure. I've always been a bit of a fan of Shawn Spears, and I was really kind of pulling for him outside of the kayfabe realm, which, shouldn't really speak about when it comes to the story, but outside the kayfabe realm, I think most people wanted him to do really well. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he was probably the weakest in this match, he didn't really get a spot, didn't help with that. And so when you then couple all of that, this is just within my own head, but when you couple all that with the fact that then the Inner Circle dominate this period, I would have hoped to have seen the Pinnacle, like we said earlier, they tend to work better as a team. We saw that throughout the match. I would like to have seen that them become a thing and they really start working together. And then suddenly it's a Sammy Guevara comeback. And then you get the Proud and Powerful get their comeback. Hager bursts out of nowhere and does something. And then Jericho eventually then, he comes out of nowhere. And that's when MJF then goes, right, plan B.
Yeah.
And then they get out of there. And on a very, very small scale, it kind of happened, but it was kind of too back and forth, really, to say that the Pinnacle were ever dominating. And there was this portion just before MJF went out where Inner Circle had the Pinnacle done. And part of the thing that really took me out of it at this point was that the Inner Circle didn't do anything that really made me think, oh, they're trying to win this match now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part where the problem with the ending portion, I don't want to say the finish because that will make people think about like the crash pad, but the ending portion of the match entirely didn't really feel like either side were trying to win. It just felt like it was like a back and forth until the Inner Circle got there, and then they didn't really feel like they were actually trying to win. And that's kind of what took me out of this, is that it felt like they were just getting, and then when MJF left, I was like, okay, they're doing something on top of the cage, and that's why. And yeah, it just kind of took me out of it a little bit by the end of it. And I just think if this portion had been a lot better and maybe that ending sequence or the ending move or whatever had been filmed a little bit better, I think people wouldn't really have the complaints that we've been seeing. It wouldn't have been anywhere near as divisive. So this is like the portion where it really got a little bit funny for me.
Yeah.
Do you think they needed the cage top?
Do you mean they needed to go on top, or do you think they needed?
Yeah.
It played into a larger story of MJF and Jericho kind of one-upping each other, and so I got that story strand where Jericho had one over on the Pinnacle, and again I think that would have been hammered home more if it looked like the Inner Circle were actually trying to win, and then MJF kind of just slides out the side whilst like they're beating the shit out of everyone else trying to get them to like quit or whatever. It kind of felt like they stopped and then MJF was off. But yeah, I think when it comes to that, like I think it was MJF. It was playing into that story of MJF getting one over Jericho. They've got Tully outside, so he can grab the key, and then MJF can get up there, and up there you can trust him to back himself. So it played into that story. I personally, I would have done things differently. But again, that's based on what I wanted. I wanted to see like a gang warfare kind of thing, and I think by this point it was very much MJF versus Jericho again.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what I didn't really like. But I get why they did it. I just personally didn't like it.
That's kind of where I am with the whole thing. It felt like I'm still waiting for the Pinnacle to be a big deal, and by the end of this match, I kind of felt like MJF is a big deal.
Yeah.
The Pinnacle are getting destroyed by the Inner Circle.
Yeah.
Apart from that, 58 big offensive moves compared to 9 in that 5v5 portion before MJF slid out.
Yeah.
That's 87% of the total kind of big moves in that slot were used by the Inner Circle. 73% of the total offense. They were destroying the Pinnacle. And if MJF didn't go to plan B, as Garb says, what? But why? Why Wardlow, FTR, and Spears? Why? They should be a really threatening force. They look great. They've picked good guys there. I don't know about Spears. I think that in the Spears slot, they should have had somebody that's maybe underneath MJF in the same way that Guevara is underneath Jericho. I'm not sure about that. It's maybe because people like him. They want him to be involved in big matches so that he can help lay them out, perhaps something like that. That makes sense. They might need that. They're better placed than I. But yeah, I don't know. I thought that the Pinnacle got buried a bit, but MJF didn't. They elevated MJF, but kind of forgot about the Pinnacle as a thing, which has kind of been my feeling in the lead up to this match too. Being like, well, the Inner Circle have got a lot over the Pinnacle. in the lead up, surely the Pinnacle are going to absolutely decimate them. And that's not really what happened.
I think if you look at the numbers, if you had reversed the Inner Circle and the Pinnacle just on this chart, it would have been a lot better. If the Pinnacle had been the ones that were dominating, I would have liked this match a lot more. Mostly because the idea of a match as brutal as this is you want the heels to use you want them to use the whole surrounding. So the fact that the Inner Circle got so much offense in because of like Santana brings in a fork, and they undo the ring, and Jericho's bashing people with the turnbuckle handle, and they do a double spike pile driver onto wood. That's the stuff that I want the heels to do, because the heels will do that kind of stuff. The baby faces shouldn't necessarily go to that level unless this is the final match. So the problem is that I think it's pretty well understood. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is not where this ends. The Pinnacle and the Inner Circle are still going to be feuding, and I believe that we're now going to break down into the individual feuds that we've seen forming. That's obvious. There's these individual feuds that are going on. So I think that's what we're going to see. This is not the end of the war between Inner Circle and Pinnacle, but the babyfaces were treated as if it were. The babyfaces came out with all this fire as if the Pinnacle had been like decimating them for months on end. This felt like the match where the Pinnacle had been doing all this horrible stuff to the Inner Circle for months and months and months, and the Inner Circle comes in and they're fired up and they're ready to end this thing. And if that were the case, then fine. But I had it framed like this is kind of the first major battle in this war, and the babyfaces were treated as if it was the final one. Now, it may be that this is the final salvo fired here and they're done, in which case, fine. The Inner Circle did what they did, but I do feel like they got too much in for me. It's hard for me to get invested when the babyfaces are absolutely dominant. And especially in a match like this. And so a lot of this, 12-minute portion where it was 5-on-5, it didn't work that well for me, especially because the babyfaces 28 weapon shots to the Pinnacle's 1. You can't have that level of disparity. The babyfaces cannot be using that many weapons like that. I understand that in a match like this, if you or I were in it, we would use everything in the kitchen sink to try to get away specifically from Wardlow. So I mean, that I understand. But the Inner Circle, they're not us. I mean, they are professional wrestlers. They shouldn't have to use all these weapons. That's what the heels do. The heels use weapons. So the fact that, Jericho brings in Floyd, the baseball bat, I love that because that's obviously part of his character. But, like, why didn't MJF sneak in? Why didn't the ring come out earlier? He's been using that weapon forever. So why didn't that come in? Why didn't some of these other guys bring in weapons with them into a match like this? It feels like it didn't connect. The story they were trying to tell did not connect with what I was actually seeing on screen that these statistics lay out in front of me, which is why we love having these statistics, because you can really quantify what we're seeing while this match is happening. And while this portion was going on, I was like, man, this doesn't work for me. I'm not into this, and this is the reason why. One thing that I also want to point out, I don't think you guys would have noticed this because I assume both of you watched it on Fight. But here in the U.S., for those of us who watched it on TNT, the final commercial break was unfortunately, I thought, very poorly planned out, because the spot where MJF or Tully Blanchard got the key and opened the door, that's obviously a turning point in the match that led to the finish. That happened during a commercial break. So we saw it on picture-in-picture, but we didn't get to hear that moment. We didn't get to hear the commentary go nuts about, oh, Tully Blanchard's got the key and all this kind of stuff. We're just seeing it in this little box-in-box. And I thought that hurt. I wish that they had planned that out better, so that moment felt like a bigger deal. Because then when they go back, because eventually they got rid of the picture-in-picture, so they go to full screen, ad breaks, and then they come back and MJF has climbed to the top. And I'm like, man, I wish that I had seen this happen, because this is a pretty important spot of this match. And so, it's one of those where I'm really glad that this was on free TV. I thought that I was praising this before. I think AEW has a very smart idea when it comes to this, because it means that this can be a one-match show and everyone's going to be okay with it. You know, if they're making me pay $50, I want to see the World Championship defended. I want to see the tag titles defended and all this kind of stuff. If it's just on TV, give me this one match and I'm fine. So that should be encouraged. I just wish that they planned the commercials better so that big spot didn't happen during a commercial break and we kind of missed what ended up being the most important part of this match. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because there was a moment when Jericho was climbing the cage and he's kind of like hyping up the crowd and stuff like that, and I was there like, you're in the middle of like this massive war supposedly. You're climbing a cage, which you know full well what the like consequences of that could be, and ultimately what they were. And then you're just there like, hey, go on, lads, like to the crowd. It's just like I was like, they've got to be in a break here, because like, what is he up to? And I guess if they were in a break, then you know, fair enough. You know, it's just for us international fans, it was a bit like, that's a bit weird. But yeah, it's just like
I think he was told to take longer. That's the impression I got.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. But
you're absolutely right. It looked like he was taking the mick.
It's so weird.
I'm positive that's what that was, because when they cut away, there was probably a minute of full screen ad break, and when they came back, Jericho was just climbing to the top, like he was just getting over.
It was just before that point, so that would be why then. But yeah,
so that's which, you know, it's kind of, again, if you put this match on pay-per-view, then the expectations become a lot different. We now need a full card, and it's really hard to build a match like this around a full card of professional wrestling. You do it on TV, and you just get to have a one-match show, and it's great. So it's kind of the trade-off. If you do it on TV, you got to work around your ad breaks and all that kind of stuff. The final portion of this match comes obviously on top of that cage, like we've been talking about, MJF and Chris Jericho up there. And this goes back to what both of you have been saying this whole time, which is that MJF, this match seemed designed to get MJF over, and I thought in that particular sense it worked. I think MJF, I think he's world class. I love MJF. I think he is a delightful heel. I mean, he's absolutely brilliant in my opinion. And so Jericho follows him, and MJF starts warding. He's doing the Ric Flair thing where he's on his knees and he's like, has his hands up. And then Jericho puts him in the walls, and MJF reverses, and he uses the ring and puts him in the salt of the earth. I thought it was a really good sequence. The problem was it was on the back of this whole 12-minute thing that we've just seen with 5-on-5 that didn't connect with me. So it's kind of like a consistency issue. So Craig, as the guy who put these stats together, MJF spent a lot of time locking Jericho into this submission, and then, stomping on the hand and doing all this stuff. What did you think about this portion of the match?
Well, this was just all very slow. So obviously this match is very easy to split up to begin with, because you've got a guy coming in each time. So as we've already kind of done the stats for each 2 minutes of like the different permutations, then I kind of made my own decision to split. As soon as MJF leaves the cage and Jericho follows him, it becomes impossible to follow what's happening in the ring. You can hear thuds and stuff, and they're obviously they're not just like all lying down, because the crowd would be like, what are you doing? But like there's no way I could monitor what was happening. So I just, this page 10, this last bit is just what happened between Jericho and MJF. And this period took 5 minutes and 24 seconds before Sammy Guevara surrendered. In that time, there was 6 strikes. I think 2 versions of the Walls of, or is it 1 Walls of Jericho? I think 1 Walls of Jericho for 17 seconds, a 26-second Salt of the Earth, a 9-second Salt of the Earth. So that's like almost a minute of submission. And then there was like, some begging off, MJF slamming Jericho's arm off the cage, a couple of kind of boots from MJF and the low blow. That's like very, like if you contrast this slide to any of the others, which are like 2 minutes, they're all far more action-packed than this, but even more damning if you contrast this chunk between MJF and Chris Jericho to Sammy Guevara versus Dax Harwood. Mm-hmm. Sammy Guevara got in 39 strikes on his own. Nothing really happened. It was a bit like when Matt Jackson was doing all that nonsense at the end of a Young Bucks match kind of a wee while ago that kind of people were critical of it. It was a lot of kind of acting. And it wasn't as bad as the Matt Jackson stuff, but like it was a bit, you're just kind of like, where are you going with this? Let's what's happening, get to the point, do something.
Yeah.
It just took a while. It just took a while.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. It worked for me personally, and I want to make that qualification because for a lot of people it didn't, and I completely understand for that reason. For me personally, it worked because I love MJF's acting. You know, that I was one of the ones that was critical of Matt Jackson in the very early stages because Matt tends to overact in situations like this, and I'm not a fan of it. MJF, I think, does not. When he overacts, it's because it's a heel thing to do. He overacts in the same way Ric Flair does, right? And so it worked for me personally. It was slow because, you know, they've been through this whole match, which up till that point was like 20 minutes or whatever. And, you know, this is kind of MJF's style. He's trying to get heat. He wants to slow it down. So it worked for me. I do understand if it didn't work for some people. It was slow. And the problem to me was that it was slow. It was all based around storytelling, but then the finish of the match was very abrupt. So like they had this very slow sequence and then suddenly the finish. And you're kind of like, you know, in a match especially like this, you want it to build to that point. And I don't know if it was a production error where we were supposed to be seeing more of this whole MJF saying, I'm going to throw him off this cage, and we're supposed to be hearing more of the dialogue. I don't know if it was that. I don't know if it was, you know, they realized they had gone too long in the all-out assault portion, and they were like, we just got to get to the end of this thing, so throw Chris Jericho off the cage. We got to get out. I don't know what it was, but it definitely seemed to me like the finish was far too abrupt for a 5-minute sequence that was very, very slow and storytelling based around MJF.
In terms of like the quality of the match, like move my move storytelling, like if you take out the building of the Pinnacle and this is just like the faces getting their revenge on the heels, it was a very good match until this point for me. Like everything up until the match beyond was pretty good, pretty solid, very interesting. The first time I watched the All Out Assault, the 5v5, I kind of lost interest. I found it a bit too samey. When I watched it again in a bit of a better mood, I enjoyed it much more. This bit I struggle with. It was just a bit kind of, you're not really doing anything, guys. And yeah, like, but I suppose I find it hard not to perhaps come across as too critical of AEW because I do hold that company to quite a lofty standard. And I would say I would be choosing between giving this match 3.75 or 4 out of 5. So yeah, it's a very, very good match. I don't know how much we need to talk about the botched finish. Like it wasn't great, but I think everybody knows that, and people that are trying to like hyperanalyze that to seem smart, I don't think it's I think it's not good. We know it's not good. They know it wasn't good. I'm sure they'll sort that out in the future. Maybe not like paint cardboard look like metal to that then bends like cardboard.
The problem with it for me, and actually before we get into the finish, we'll talk about the finish a little bit. But like you say, I don't want to overanalyze it. But Gareth, I want to give you a chance to comment on this final portion, MJF and Jericho on top of the cage. You've heard the difference between the way that Craig and I feel about it. So where do you come down on this?
Kind of middle-ish, maybe a little bit more towards Craig. I think part of the problem with this basically was, I don't want to be mean to him, even though I don't like him, but Jericho's selling is, on a night where you saw Darby Allin get thrown down those stairs and for me anyway, I was like, I don't know if he's genuinely injured or if he's just that good at selling and acting. Jericho just like, I don't know. I never believed he was really hurt. Um, yeah, and so when he was, in the arm, it was whatever. It didn't look particularly great to me, but in the arm bar, what's it called?
The Salt of the Earth.
Oh,
That's the one, yeah. When he was in there, I didn't think it looked particularly great. I like the fact that MJF used the ring when he got up there. Again, we spoke that could have come earlier, but I like the fact that they did save it. MJF, like, he was taunting a lot, and he was soaking in the moment an awful lot, and that is MJF, and that's what he does. But meanwhile, Jericho's just laying there, and I'm like, realistically, you were the last one to come into this match. You've taken the least damage out of everyone who's in it. Bear in mind, like, MJF's face is covered in blood at this point, and Jericho's like hasn't taken anywhere near that level of beating, as we saw in the bit before this when they're still locked in the cage. That portion of the match beyond. Inner Circle were completely dominant, so Jericho barely really took anything. And it's like, I don't know, I don't believe, even though you are 50, I don't believe you're that gassed after like 15 minutes. Because you are still a professional wrestler, so you should still be going. And he'd taken some damage by this point, again, the ring and the arm, the Salt of the Earth.
The low blow as well.
Yeah, the low blow as well. Oh, okay, this is a wrestling thing. This isn't on Jericho or anything. But when you get hit down there, you don't feel it immediately. I don't know what your experience is, but you don't just immediately go to it.
Don't know, you can.
I don't know. Anyway, from my experience, it kind of like
football, I've gone down pretty abruptly.
I think maybe
you don't get the full effect of it for a little while.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets worse. Yeah.
Yeah. So I always found like whenever that happens in wrestling, I'm like, I wish they would be like, oh shit, I know what's gonna happen, and then it's more of like I don't know. Anyway, that's just my personal thing. I know it's wrestling. We just kind of suspend our disbelief sometimes. But yeah, that was just the thing on the low blow. But it was the thing like throughout this segment, basically, I didn't believe any of Jericho's selling. Didn't believe he was really that hurt to the point there he was standing for what felt like a minute as MJF was threatening to push him off. And I was like, why don't you just like push him off? Like pull him towards you. If you both go off, fuck it. It doesn't matter. Like you both go off anyway. But like... I didn't understand why Jericho was just stood there, and that's what really took it out of me for this. And like again, we'll talk about the finish in the actual like fall in a minute, I guess, or we don't have to. I don't really care. But like that was my bigger issue with the finish, was that I just felt like, I don't know, I didn't quite believe that Jericho was that finished, that Guevara had to give up. I feel like that something could have happened. So it was more like the execution of all of this was the problem, because I completely see where they were going with in terms of the story, even though I would have preferred more of like a war between the two teams. I get the story with Jericho and MJF in that. I just wish they had executed it a little bit differently for me. But yeah, so I'm a little bit like, I see where you're coming from, and I did enjoy parts of it, but then there were parts where I was just like, I don't know. And then when they actually did push him, I just laughed. Like I was out of it that much, but I was just laughing. And that was it.
The problem, I feel like the problem was from the beginning, you knew where we were going with this. Like from the instant that Chris Jericho was on the ledge, you're like, he's going off. I mean, he has to.
Yeah.
So the problem is that they milked it, right? And MJF likes to do this. He likes to milk the moment and really try to soak in as much heat as possible. But in this particular situation, what I would have preferred is, for him to be yelling down, I will push him off if you don't surrender. And, I wanted to see, I know that everyone criticizes WWE and Kevin Dunn for the massive number of camera cuts. But in this particular situation, what I would have liked to see was a lot of cuts, specifically of all the Inner Circle guys trying to get up top and try to save him. That's what I would like, just to sell this moment that everyone's like, oh my God, Jericho's going to go off this thing. So they're all trying to scramble up, and ultimately Sammy gives up. And I would have liked MJF to just immediately push him off. Like I didn't want him to milk it at all. I just want him to, Sammy goes, we surrender, bell rings, and then off Jericho goes. That's what I would have preferred.
Just a smirk, like a quick smirk.
Yeah, exactly. Because the problem is that when you milk it, everyone knows, yep, he's going off this thing. So it really loses that moment. But if you can shock us, if you think that MJF is going to milk this, and then boom, there goes Jericho, that's when you can kind of re-inject that shock value, even though we knew from moment one that Jericho was going off. The other big problem, and as someone who works in TV, this is something that I don't know if everyone really caught on to, that this was an issue, but for me, this was the biggest issue, was right before Jericho went off, they cut to a wide shot that clearly showed the crash pad. And it's like, okay, don't do that. Keep it tight on these guys. I know, as a real person, I know that there's a crash pad down there. Jericho's not Darby Allin. Darby Allin might take that bump just onto the stage, but Chris Jericho's not going to. So I know that there's a crash pad down there. But do you remember in the Stadium Stampede when Kenny Omega hit Sammy Guevara with the One-Winged Angel? And it was onto this massive crash pad. But they didn't show the crash pad right before he did it. So he does the One-Winged Angel, and it's crazy, and he goes through the wood, and you hear the crash pad, and you're like, okay, yeah, there's obviously a pad there, but the moment of him, plummeting down to earth with Guevara and the One-Winged Angel, that was the cool moment. So I would really have preferred that they didn't show me that crash pad was there, and that they just kept it tight, and then off goes Jericho, and then you hear the impact, and that's when we see the crash pad. And at that point, you suspend your disbelief. You say, yeah, I know there's crash pad there. I'm going to pretend like I didn't see that. But if you show it to me right before it happens, now I'm like, okay, guys, there's a crash pad there. Like, it loses its effectiveness for me. So those were the two big issues. I don't necessarily disagree with what they did, because MJF is a prick. Of course he would toss Jericho off the thing, whether Sammy surrendered or not. So that made a lot of sense. But I think, I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it a botch. I just think it wasn't executed as cleanly as it could have been.
Yeah, I think we're also speaking about it more because of the amount of fuss that's been made about it elsewhere. Like, it's like, that looks a bit rubbish, but I was more concerned with how my overriding thing was like the Pinnacle kind of felt like they got a bit buried, except for MJF, who kind of got a huge amount of heat off of it. That's what I cared about. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see why people are making a fuss about that, but I'll just move on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when it comes to the Pinnacle burial, if you look at the offense graph, the total offense graph, as well as the big offense graph, I think that's where you can really see it. The Inner Circle was just much better when the numbers were even, and I feel like it's kind of a damning indictment of the Pinnacle, because the Pinnacle's new. Like, if the story you're telling is the Inner Circle has been this team forever, so they know each other inside and out, and that's why they can do this when it's even strength, then fine. If that's the story you want to tell, then tell it. But the problem is, I don't think that was the story. The commentators, I don't think once ever said, well, the Inner Circle's been teaming for much longer, so obviously they're going to be better in this scenario. And that's like something you would expect JR to say. That's something you expect him to bring up, and he never did. So that's not the story. And so that does, to me, kind of feel a burial-esque of the Pinnacle, I think.
Yeah, I think when you look at that overall graphic of all the different sequences put together, and you see 60% for Inner Circle versus the Pinnacle, it kind of really says to me, like you said, rather than really that being necessarily the story, it felt to me that they knew obviously the Pinnacle were going to win, so it was try and keep Inner Circle, these guys looking strong, because ultimately the finish is only about two people anyway. Right. So yeah, I think that was their thinking behind it, but then it's the argument of, okay, but does that actually make the best match? Does that make for the best story? What about Sean Spears, who, again, like I said earlier, he had the chair shots and that's kind of his thing, but they weren't really built to. They kind of just happened and then they're gone. Guevara had his moment, Wardlow had his, FTR had their moment, Santana Ortiz had theirs, Hager had his, Jericho had his, MJF obviously had his in the end. Specifically, Sean Spears, I think, really didn't come out of this any better. And out of all the ones, he was the one who really needed to. But I think that was their thinking behind it, is try and keep these guys strong because they're going to lose. especially if it is going to continue, because then you can always make FTR look great when they beat Santana and Ortiz, even though I don't want that to happen. You can always, have Wardlow beat Hager again. Sean Spears could beat Guevara again. I don't really want that to happen. Actually, the match I really want is MJF versus Guevara, because Guevara should be the one most pissed off by MJF out of all of them. But that's what I think that their thinking was. But I don't know whether it's the best way to go in future.
I wonder how many of these matches we're getting at Double or Nothing. Like, will it be FTR versus Proud and Powerful, Wardlow versus maybe not that one, but like, well, I don't know, it might just be the tag. Yeah.
I'd like to see MJF versus Guevara at Double or Nothing. I really like to see
that would be good. That would be good. Actually, that would work because of the emotional kind of story that you've just mentioned.
Yeah. In terms of the history, MJF does have more of it with Guevara in terms of the way the breakup worked, even though, obviously
exactly.
Leader versus leader, it's going to be MJF versus Jericho at some point. But I agree with you in terms of emotion and in terms of just the general storytelling point. So with MJF and Jericho, you can tell the story of, the old guard versus the new. We've seen that story before. And it's all well and good. I mean, I really like Chris Jericho and I love MJF, so it's fine. But in terms of MJF versus Guevara, not only do you have that emotional backstory from their time in the Inner Circle, but these are two guys that AEW could build around for the next 15 years. Both of these guys could legitimately be world champions at some point, and I'm positive MJF will be. So, it's also got that kind of piece to that whole story, much like MJF versus Jungle Boy from a few months ago, which I also loved.
Yeah, like Guevara versus MJF is a future main event of a pay-per-view. You could easily, there's a few of those you could do with AEW, but that's one that feels like they're building a history so that in 3, 4, 5 years, these two are main eventing a pay-per-view and you've got all this to go back on. And, you could do a thing where it's like Guevara's never been able to beat MJF after 3 or 4 attempts, and maybe in 5 years it's for the title, and then that feels great. And that, that is how far I feel like this is how far this company thinks ahead. Not specifically to the date, but they'll be like, we'll keep this in our back pocket. We're going to build to this, things like that.
Yeah.
So, I think also on Jericho versus MJF, I think we will get another match between them. But I think Jericho should probably be selling that fall for quite a while. And with 3 weeks to go, Guevara definitely feels like the one to do now, and maybe All Out, or maybe you do it on a TV special like this. You can revisit that match again. But for now,
I agree with you. I would like to see Guevara versus MJF. I would like to see Sammy step up because he's the one who surrendered, right? So he has the most connection to Jericho, right? He and Jericho are the closest out of anyone on Inner Circle. So, and Jericho even said that during the parlay, Jericho said, I'm the one who brought Sammy Guevara into this, and then you made me kick him out, or you made him leave and all this. So I feel like Sammy should be the one to step up while Jericho's selling this fall and say, I surrendered this, you did this. So now it's on and it's going to be Double or Nothing. I'm with you. I would like to see that. I don't know if that's what they're going to deliver. I feel like it's too quick to do MJF versus Jericho because that's the two leaders of these factions. That feels like that's going to be the last match. It would be kind of weird if Wardlow and Hager was the last match. I'd prefer to see MJF and Jericho. So I guess we'll see going forward. The one thing that we do know about AEW is that they can always surprise us. They will always at least threaten to deliver something different than what we're expecting. And I think when it comes to this match overall, that's, I think, what made a lot of people kind of hesitant to love this match, because AEW is so good at delivering things we're not expecting. They literally just did it earlier in this show when Darby Allin took a shoot fall down a staircase. And they come into this match, and this match is exactly what you expected. I mean, it's to the T what we expect from a match like this, and that's not a bad thing. I think it would have been worse if they had tried to do something way different and failed, because then we might never see this match again. And the reality is, even though there's a lot of things to be critical about that we have been, The reality is this was still a really, really good match, in my opinion. And so we'll probably see blood and guts again. So I think, AEW just delivered a match that everyone expected, and everyone's like, oh, well, you didn't swerve us somehow? You didn't do something different? That's what we've come to expect from them.
Yeah, I think as well, like, the things that they did not so well are things they can learn from in the future easily. Yeah. They can gauge this reaction, and then when they do go again, because I think they will, I think it's going to be Cody, because he just wants to live out his fantasy of being his dad.
I want the Young Bucks. I want the Young Bucks in this match. I think they'd be incredible.
What I need is Rey Fenix in this match. I need Phoenix working with two rings.
Although, to be fair, Sammy Guevara did quite a good job of utilizing that.
Oh, absolutely. Sammy really blew me away. It goes back to our point earlier. He blew me away with how well he worked with those two rings. Botch aside, which I think the commentary did a good job cleaning up for when he botched that double ring jump. But like the Spanish Fly, my God, I legit had a tear when he did that. That was unbelievable. And that's the kind of thing you expect from Rey Fenix. So that's I feel like that's a tangent. Put Phoenix in this match. Anyway, continue with your point.
I interrupted you, Gareth. You were saying about Cody.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cody definitely wants to get in here because, it's the whole Dusty Cody thing. We'll probably see, and that it will lead into, like, now that MJF and the Pinnacle have a history in this match as well, I think that's going to lead into a collection of Cody and his mates, whether that be the Elite along down the line, or whether that be the Nightmare Family. I think a collection of, they're going to build that, and that will be a way in which they'll reunite that feud between MJF and Cody, because it's basically, Dusty and Co versus Four Horsemen, isn't it? That's basically what it would be.
Yeah.
And that's Cody for you.
Well,
some people like it, as we found out recently. Some people hate it.
Yeah, true. And hopefully we have enough time to talk about Cody's involvement in this particular show, not just because it involves my boy Anthony Ogogo in the factory, but anyway, the thing about the way AEW books this, I hope, is they don't just do, and this is something that Jericho's talked about, where he says, I don't want to just do, it's May, so it's time for Blood and Guts, I want them to be able to say, Blood and Guts is the match that we reserve for the group storylines that are, the absolute hottest, the absolute, need this match in order to hopefully to blow off. I mean, this is a big criticism with this match leading in, was that this isn't the blow off. This is the first in terms of the war between these two teams. And so you can like that or not, but that definitely was a criticism coming in. So I would like to see this be used as a blow-off to a feud, the way that it was back in the 80s and 90s. And then obviously, WCW ended up doing this, where WCW has War Games the same time every year. And it's kind of like, so then it becomes, okay, who's on the War Games team and here's what it's for and all that kind of stuff. And that's all fine. WCW did it to compete with Survivor Series. But in this particular situation, I would like to see Blood and Guts be the special match that gets broken out at special times for very special feuds. And I think that's kind of where they're going with it. So going forward, that's what I'd like to see. What I learned from this match, as someone who got into wrestling much later in life than most people that are in this position, I started watching wrestling when I was 22, 23, and I'm now 25. So, we're talking about me getting into it a lot later than probably both of you and probably everyone else on Pro Wrestling Musings. So for me to learn the history of wrestling, I had to go back and watch all these different matches and read and try to understand what's going on in all these different instances. And everything that I picked up was that War Games matches, going back to my point I made at the very beginning of this show, War Games matches are really difficult to produce. They're really difficult to wrestle in, and very often they don't end up being great matches. It's far more likely when you look at the history of War Games that you will find bad matches, or at least matches, than you'll find matches that blow you away. So I think this is the nature of this kind of of gimmick match. And I think AEW, what they should take from this is this kind of match is about storytelling, which they did, and it will be about the moments that you create in this match. This is also something we discuss over on our YouTube channel, where this is about making moments for this feud. And so for, as both of you have mentioned, for potential feuds that might come, to have this in the back pocket, whether it's MJF versus Jericho, they have this match, or MJF versus Guevara in 5 years for the world title, this match exists for those moments that we can reference back. I think that's a lot of what this match exists for. And the ultimate, the 5-star matches, the great matches that we're expecting to come out of this, will come in the singles or tag scene. They won't come in a match like this. So I just wonder, with that being said, is it worth it to do this kind of match for a feud like this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great place to start with this match. There are lots of story iterations to carry on, just like you summarized. It's probably going to be a success in the long run. I'm probably more of I just like a 1v1 or a 2v2, I think. More I get excited for these fancy matches. It's going to be great, but I don't know, I just like the psychology of the kind of 1v1 or 2v2. I'm so psyched for next week's show. It looks fantastic. Mm-hmm. Like the array of big 1v1 matches and then that tag team title match. And I'm so excited that they're using the rankings really sensibly to give you like who's going to fight the champion. Oh, let's see how the two guys with the best records, who comes out on top. Mm-hmm. Got two great guys there. Nuts. I'm interested to see what they do with this next time. I want to see the Bucks in there. I think Cody would be great too. You might even see the Pinnacle against like a version of the Elite as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. What you said there, Craig. I think for this match, like one thing I hadn't really thought about it being before was a match that you can spring from, because I always just kind of thought this is something you build to blow a story off. But really now, sitting here where we are, looking at all the possibilities to jump off and like, it doesn't have to necessarily, you don't necessarily have to jump straight into it. We could have Guevara versus MJF. Jericho could sell this injury for a while if he's got something to do. Hager, he's not missed, so we don't really care. Santana and Ortiz can kind of just be in the tag division, and Guevara can just do his thing. But you can come back to it whenever you want, whether it be Santana and Ortiz versus FTR in 6 months for the tag titles, for example. Mm-hmm. And then you've got all this history to go on. Like I was saying before, it could be 5 years down the line, MJF versus Guevara. They're not going to be at each other every week, but eventually you get there, and it's like you've got all this history behind you in a match like this. And I think that's great. That you have that as like story which you can then build from, which I just hadn't really. I'd always just thought of it as something that you build to blow something off. But no.
I think when you look at the individual talent in this match, you've got FTR, who I'm positive will be tag champions again. Obviously, they have been once. You have MJF, who I'm positive will be a world champion. Then you've got Wardlow, who could be a world champion. You've got Sammy Guevara, who could be a world champion. There's a lot of guys in this match that, if we look back in 2-3 years, I mean, they could be doing any number of things in AEW. They could be main eventers. They could be champions. And so to think of this particular moment as, this being the time when these guys start to, break into that level of themselves as competitors, I think that in the grand history that AEW hopes to create for itself, everyone involved in AEW has such an appreciation of the history of professional wrestling. They want to do that same thing. So in the history that they hope to create with AEW, this is one of those high points that they want people to be able to reference going back.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do that kind of thing. Like Cody and MJF had that huge kind of long storyline. They had the blow-off match. They haven't been very near each other very much at all, if since then. And presumably they'll come back together at some point. So yeah, I want Jericho to disappear, and I don't really want him to come up against MJF for quite some time now. But I do think that the storyline shoots from this will be more like Guevara versus MJF and Proud and Powerful versus FTR. Probably another Wardlow Hager match. But yeah, I don't know. I think Jericho and MJF. I think they need a big Grizzly blow-off match, just 1v1. I think it can probably wait a wee while though.
Yeah.
Do you fancy moving towards finishing up? Shall we do maybe quick thoughts on the rest of the show? Because there's a couple of big story points there.
Yes, actually, that's exactly where I wanted to get into. I think the involvement of Darby Allin, the TNT champion, I thought that was the highlight of the show. When it comes to star-making performances outside of the Blood and Guts match, I know you'd all be expecting me to say that it was Anthony Ogogo, which is reference number 3 if you're keeping score at home. But no, actually, I think the big star made was actually Ethan Page. I thought he was phenomenal. I thought he was so great in that promo, and he kind of he those of us who are wrestling statistics buffs, he kind of touched our heart a little bit because he said, everyone thinks there's a strategy, there's some big, there's like you can't figure out Darby Allin, and I'm gonna figure out Darby Allin. Which obviously he meant something different by that, but for those of us who keep wrestling statistics, I think it's just kind of cool to think about, Ethan Page is like him and Sky are in a boardroom somewhere working on tactics about here's what we do to beat Darby Allin. And for me, with my sports background, I just love to think about that. I thought he was great. I thought that whole segment of Allin being thrown down a flight of stairs was unreal. I did not see that coming ever. That was, to me, one of the highlights of the show. What did you guys feel about that?
For sure. Like I said earlier, I think that was my highlight of the entire show. I really love when a wrestler can actually act quite well. There was a promo that Hangman Page did last year. It was actually a backstage interview with Tony Schiavone, and I thought he was just it was so masterful the way he acted it. And Darby Allin here, it was much more simpler than that Hangman thing. So there are kind of layers to that. But when you can get me to completely just be I don't actually know what's real and what's not anymore. It's just so good. And again, if Jericho had 10% of what Darby Allin did at the end of the War Games match or the Blood and Guts match, I think it would have been so much better because that's how good Darby Allin was here. But yeah, it was amazing, I thought.
Craig, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. I really liked the promo. Ethan Page. Scorpio Sky came across quite well here too.
Yep.
Why these two are together is still anybody's guess. We'll to know what's going on with Scorpio Sky. I liked the face paint line from Ethan Page about because I put a dent in your forehead. That was interesting, and it was quite a visual thing. And yeah, very very interested to see this match now after finding Page and Sky quite tedious in previous weeks. Presumably, those two clash at Double or Nothing after Allin loses the title to Miro, is my guess. I'm quite up for that. I thought Miro put himself across really well this week. It's going to be the man who's not afraid of dying against the man who's not afraid to kill him line made me laugh out loud. I thought that was great. So yeah, that storyline's fascinating. I thought Cody and QT, I thought their match was great. Nothing special. Very engaging, very well worked. I really like QT Marshall. He's a bit rough around the edges in ring style, but I really like him.
So this is actually something that Gareth and I discussed briefly on Twitter, and this is I am the one who has been the most vocal to criticize Cody Rhodes for the way that he's been presented in AEW. Not him as a person or as a wrestler or as a booker or whatever, just the way he's presented. However, you might expect that him, going over clean on QT here for people like me who have criticized him would be like, oh, what the hell is he doing? QT needs the win. No, this actually I thought was brilliant because it shows me that the long-term story is not QT going over. The long-term story is Anthony Ogogo going over, and maybe Camarado as well. But specifically, we're talking Ogogo here because that QT is not the guy that we need to see, right? QT, he's got other things that he needs to do, and no one wants to see QT in a place of, top of the card type of situation. But Ogogo, yeah, let's see him. Let's see more out of him. We've talked about this on the podcast before. This seems to be the story. Ogogo's going to be the guy that goes over Cody. And when you are the guy that beats Cody Rhodes, look at what that does. MJF was the guy that beat Cody Rhodes, and now look where he's at. He's having matches like this. He's having huge feuds like this. And there's other guys that did it. Darby Allin has now main evented like 5 Dynamites in a row, not counting Blood and Guts. Something crazy like that. He's the guy that beat Cody Rhodes. Brody Lee was the guy that beat. Like, these are all things that Gareth has brought up before, and for all the criticism that I have levied against Cody, what he does do is when he loses, and he loses to the right guy, that will elevate whoever it is. And this, to me, showed that guy is going to be Ogogo, not Marshall, and I'm down with that.
Yeah, I think, like, as well, considering where Ogogo is, like, he can still lose this match and be elevated from it. And that's why it's part of what intrigues me about the match, because, like, I could genuinely see them going both ways. Because, like, the whole Ogogo thing is that right hand to the gut. If he catches you there, you're done. But, like, otherwise, you would expect Cody to, like, kind of dance around him and use his wrestling skill. And it would be a very interesting, like, people often cite the Muhammad Ali versus Antonio Inoki. Everyone built it up as like, oh, interesting clash of styles. And it was actually really boring. But, like, this could actually be that. But obviously in a worked sense, to the point where it's, like, it can actually be really interesting. I'm not saying Ogogo is Muhammad Ali or that Cody's Inoki, but, but it could be that kind of same 2 styles, just worked in a way which could actually be really interesting. Or it could just go that way. But I don't think Cody's just going to lie on his back and try and trip Ali Ogogo up. So I think it'll be a bit better than that. But yeah, it's a really interesting one. They could go but either way. And I mean, you see all these, like, kind of cross sport fighting, like McGregor versus Mayweather, and YouTubers jumping in there and all this sort of thing. And it's kind of like puts this whole thing of like, wow, these 2 styles, how would they actually mix up? And then somehow you've got a YouTuber knocking out a former MMA champion, and you just don't understand how it's all working. But in a wrestling sense, you can actually do that. You can do that. You can tell a story and you can make sense of it. And that's what I think is really interesting about this. So, I'm really excited for that. And it could go either way. I do hope Ogogo gets it. And if he doesn't, I know all that criticism is going to be there for Cody. But I'm sure there'll be a plan where, it will work out eventually.
Yeah, I mean, obviously anyone who's listened knows that I hope Ogogo goes over in that particular situation. What I really like about this story is that I'm really glad you brought up that comparison, because when you do look at these people that cross over, there's often that story of, the person who is crossing over is the one who is overmatched, right? So Conor McGregor was overmatched against Floyd Mayweather, because even though Conor is one of the most talented mixed martial artists of all time, he's not a boxer. And so he was outmatched against Floyd. This is almost working in reverse. The way that they have booked Ogogo right now is he's the one crossing over into pro wrestling. But it almost feels to me, if they had that match tomorrow, the story would be that Cody is overmatched. That Ogogo, that right hand is so dangerous that even though Cody is a much better wrestler, surely, than Ogogo is, it doesn't matter, because that right hand's going to be the equalizer. And I really like that story is being told, because it allows Ogogo to grow into himself as a professional wrestler, assuming that he's going to do this for, a number of years going forward. He needs time to grow into that, full-fledged pro wrestler. And in the meantime, that right hand is going to be, like I say, the equalizer. You don't need to be a tremendous professional wrestler if one right will put you down. And that's what we've been building Ogogo to be. Yeah.
No, exactly. I think as well, like, Oh, the point's just gone out of my head. It's one of those where it's just gone. What was I going to say? Never mind. It wasn't that important. I don't want to take up.
I'm sure it was that important, but Craig, I'm sure you
yeah.
also have something important to say.
I tuned out because it was Garv's turn to speak. What was the question?
The question was important things that you have to say.
About just like AEW, the end of this show.
No, we're talking to Gogo and Cody, and talking about the potential clash of styles.
I think this pod is coming to an end. The clash of styles. A lot of dancing around from Cody, like you said. I don't know who wins. I don't know if a Gogo needs to win. Barely anyone goes over Cody, and when they do, it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know if he goes over Cody. It'd be really interesting to hear what Sergey thinks. Yeah. He's quite into the Cody character and the use of Cody. I don't know if a Go-Go goes over Cody, or if Cody squeaks out a win, but a Go-Go is really dangerous. But I don't know what a Go-Go can do to Cody that kind of puts him over without winning, because that punch is kind of all or nothing. If he hits that punch properly on Cody in the match, surely he has to win. So perhaps he just wins. I don't know. It'll be fast. It'll be so fascinating because it's different. It's like we were speaking about earlier on. It's so different to the kind of, when's the RKO coming? Is Randy Orton going to win? It's either distraction finisher, or distraction roll up, or RKO. Like, somebody being punched in the gut happens in every match, and it'll be fat. It's really interesting, and it's different, and that's different is good.
What I kind of like about the way that it seems to be setting up, I would love to see a Go-Go be the exception to the rule that we started the show talking about, how there's all these different kinds of finishers that all these different guys use, men and women. They have all different kinds of moves that they use to finish matches. And a Go-Go is just the guy that comes in and says, no, I'm going to punch you. I'm going to punch you in the gut. And that's it. That's going to end the match every time. That's what's going to happen. If he's the one guy that does it, it's the exception, right? If there is an exception to the rule, that exception is really effective. So if a Go-Go is the one guy that uses only one move and you know it's coming and it's just a matter of when, then I think it'll work if he's the only one that does it, right? And the problem is if everyone does it, then it starts to become boring. But I would like to see that punch be the kill shot that a Go-Go can unleash at any point. And it is like an RKO, right? Just to continue that example, the RKO is famous for being able to come out of nowhere, right? That's the quote. Well, that punch, I mean, a Go-Go's used it in every scenario, and it can actually come out of nowhere because it's just a punch. I mean, you can punch anyone from any situation. So maybe this is me being biased. Everyone knows how much I love Anthony Ogogo, but I do feel like if that's the story we're telling with Ogogo with his boxing background, I would like to see it, as long as AEW uses some level of restraint when it comes to it. And I think AEW has been pretty effective at restraining themselves from overdoing anything since they started as a company.
Yeah, absolutely. It's real. The difference is it's real. It's not. It's like the RKO is a piece of theater, and people don't fall like that when you try to hit them with an RKO. If a Go-Go was like, if Randy Orton tried to hit me with an RKO, it would probably hurt my neck a lot, because the way I would your head would go to the ground, but you would stay standing, and it would be probably a lot of twisting and part. But like if a Go-Go walked up to you and punched you to the gut, you'd have a similar reaction to jobber that got knocked out the other week.
You'd probably have to put me in traction. I'd probably be in the hospital for years. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you.
Years.
I wish I was exaggerating, but I'm not actually that tough. So no, but you're right. There is something real about what a Go-Go does, and for AEW, they've always towed that line between how much do we go to the more crazy elements of pro wrestling, and you look at a lot of what Matt Hardy did when he first got into the company, the whole Dark Order storyline, and how much do we go into that versus how much do we go into the sports aspect of it? Because that was originally AEW said we're going to be a more sports-focused company, and that vision has kind of shifted, not in a bad way. I'm fine with it, but it's shifted away. So now to bring a Go-Go in, who is famously a sports star, a shoot star, to bring him in and have him add that level of, this is real. Like, is he actually punching someone in the gut? Would it actually look like that? Because, yeah, it kind of would. Like you said, I think it's a really good contrast if a Go-Go were to go up against some of these guys that are less shoot intimidating, I guess you would say. Not that any of these guys couldn't break me in half tomorrow, because they could, but a Go-Go could do it more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to see how far Marco Stunt goes when he eventually catches him, just flying out of the ring.
I want to see them put him on like those ropes that they use, like special effects, like a harness, and so he just hits him and he flies out of the arena.
Oh, dear.
That I'll make that exception.
It'll
man,
still be better than Alexa Bliss.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that one's fair. Yeah, that's fair. It definitely would be, just because it's Marco Stunt. This was, I thought, overall a really good episode of Dynamite. This Blood and Guts episode, and I believe that this was a really good episode of the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. Although, of course, I may be a little biased in that particular regard, but it's always great when we get to have Craig on here. And Gareth, man, thank you so much for joining us for the first time. Hopefully, it will not be the last. So please tell the people where they can find you.
Just over on Twitter at RHWGareth. Do also have my own YouTube channel that I do with a friend. We stream for every Dynamite over on Twitch, which is just at official_RHW. But there's a link to that on my Twitter. We're busy, so things are a bit quiet at the moment, but we'll get back to it eventually. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Perfect. Craig, please tell the people where they can find you, other than ProWrestlingMusings.com, of course.
The Twitter handle is Craig PW Musings, all one word. The website bits of the at PW Musings Twitter handle too. Sorry, I've become very tired. I've got a 9 week old child, which is deal withable until you have to go back to work, and teaching's already a lifestyle rather than a job. So yes, I'm very tired at this point, but yes, do that. You will also find Griff at...
Oh, is that the point for me? Okay, I'm glad you did that.
Yes.
Yeah, you can go find me over on Twitter at Griff from GA, and go check out my personal YouTube channel at General Admission Wrestling. But more importantly, what I want you all to do, if you're not already there, is go on over to the Pro Wrestling Musings YouTube channel, where we have all kinds of cool stuff happening, including this podcast, again, if you're not watching. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple or Google or wherever you listen to podcasts, over on YouTube, you can get this same show with all of our visuals that we talk about, all of the graphs and all of the numbers that we continue to reference throughout the show. So you can go over to YouTube and you can see all of that just to reference back to while you're watching. So go and give that a watch if you haven't already. I think it's probably the best way to consume this podcast, since what we do is so visual. But wherever you are, thank you so much for tuning in. Leave us a 5-star review. Let us know if you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know if you didn't. I like that too, because I want to make sure that everyone gets the experience that they want out of the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. So once again, thank you to you all. Thank you to Craig and to Gareth. And we will see you next week on the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. We appreciate you.